Let's just get right into it. So, Michael, thank you so much for coming into my YouTube channel. I want to ask you how the Jehovah's Witnesses came into your life, and you can go ahead and share your story as a Jehovah's Witness.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Um, so Jehovah's Witnesses came into my life at birth, actually. I was born into it in Southern California in the 70s. And the story of how that happened is a little interesting. My dad was a Catholic, and got to know my mom, my eventual mother, in Southern California, and she was raised kind of halfway in, halfway out of the Jehovah's Witness faith, and they ended up having a relationship, and my mother got pregnant with my older sister, and they did the right thing in the late 60s and decided to get married, but she would not marry a Catholic. And so my dad left the Catholic faith and married my mother and became a Jehovah's Witness at the time. And the interesting thing about that, which later on in my story becomes important, is that his mother, my paternal grandmother, disowned him for leaving the Catholic faith, and cast him out of the family, which is a little bit interesting given what I eventually did years later. So I was born into the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I have an older sister and a younger sister, and we all were in the faith, and I had extended family that were all Jehovah's Witnesses, and so it was a very large family community in rural North Idaho at this time, and by all accounts, it was a great upbringing. I mean, I know that some people have horror stories of growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, but I was loved. I had everything I needed, and that was all I knew. And so life was good as a kid, right? As I got older and was pressured to get baptized, as many young Jehovah's Witnesses are, I really wanted to, as they say, make the truth your own. I'm not sure if that's still taught, but this is in the 90s now. So I took that to heart, and I was a model teenage Jehovah's Witness. I didn't lie on my time when I filled it out each month of how much I proselytized. I actually went out and knocked on doors and tried to make new converts, and I researched, I did all the Bible studies, and the purpose in doing that was, if I was going to really, be a Jehovah's Witness, I wanted it to be based on something I really understood and believed. And that's what I was taught, right? And because of that, I decided to delay baptism. And it got to be about 16, 17 years old, and I was seeing all of my friends and my peer group getting baptized, as young as 9 in some cases. And I wasn't baptized yet, right? And in Jehovah's Witnesses, that's an anomaly, right? If you're not baptized in your young teen years, at least where I grew up. So I was getting a lot of pressure, and the thing that made me get baptized was a girl. I wanted to date, and the only way that I could date was if I was baptized, and was dating with the goal of marriage eventually. So I decided to go through the questions with my local elders. I answered them just fine, and was able to get baptized in 1995, and ended up marrying that girl that I got baptized for. I had a Jehovah's Witness wedding, and we became kind of the young kind of model couple in our local congregation. She was a pioneer. I became a ministerial servant in my early 20s, and we were kind of the future of our local small church, right? Things that are interesting about that story, that might be strange to some people. Before I was married, I didn't talk with my now wife if we wanted children. I didn't talk with her about where we wanted to live. I didn't talk with her about a lot of her life goals and if she wanted to go to college, which of course, as Jehovah's Witness, isn't necessarily something that you're encouraged to do. So there were a lot of major life choices that I didn't take the time to understand what I wanted and what my eventual life partner wanted. And I can 100% equate that to the fact that I was being pressured to get baptized, and this was just the thing that you did: is you get baptized, you get married, and you become a leader as much as you can in the congregation. So that's kind of what I did, just on autopilot, right? So fast forward a few years, and everything's great. In my marriage, with my family, my extended family, we're all Jehovah's Witnesses. But I've always been a curious, a seeker of knowledge, someone who wants to understand why things are the way they are, right? It's the same curiosity that led me to really try to understand why I wanted to become a Jehovah's Witness. And so I read a lot of science books. And I got to the point where I started to read things in these books that didn't make sense to me. And so for one concrete instance, there was a book, I believe it was an evolution book that Jehovah's Witnesses published, and they quoted a really famous atheist, Richard Dawkins. And they made the quote sound like Richard Dawkins doubted that evolution was a fact. Now, I had read some of his books. I knew that there was no way this polemic atheist would in any way doubt that evolution happened. And so I went and looked up the quote that the Watchtower had taken, and I saw that they took it out of context. He was doubting the mechanisms of evolution, not that actually happened. So that was kind of the first light bulb moment for me that something's not right here. And so I did what my training was. I went to the elders, and they said, I'm struggling with this. I'm trying to strengthen my faith. Why would the Watchtower take this out of context? And I did that very dispassionately. I was with the intent of just trying to understand. And I was essentially told to not research these quotes outside of Watchtower literature, right? That I was in the wrong for doing my own research. And so that was kind of the second red flag for me, right? That my information was being controlled, right? That I wasn't allowed to do basic research. And at the same time, I was toying with the idea of finishing my undergraduate degree. So I left that part out of my story. After I graduated high school, I took one semester of college, but it didn't take. I wasn't prepared for college out of high school because my family hadn't prepared me for that. It wasn't something I was expected to do. And so it was just overwhelming for me. And I decided to get a job so I could, get a car and all that material stuff, right? But now I'm a little older, I'm 25, and I decide, with these red flags I'm getting, I think I want to go back and finish my undergraduate degree. So I actually talked to my local elders about this, and I said, this is what I'm doing. It's not going to affect any of the responsibilities I have in the congregation. I'm still going to get my 10 hours a month in field service, and my wife's a pioneer. And, they counseled me that this, be careful, you're going to associate with some people that might take you away from the faith. And I said, okay. So I went to college, and my eyes were opened. I took a lot of philosophy. I took a lot of critical thinking courses, and had a slew of questions that didn't make sense to me. Like I couldn't, I can't think of the word. I couldn't square what I was learning in church with what I was learning in college, right? And so again, I went to the elders, And I asked some questions, and I got the same response. Why are you asking these questions? You shouldn't be asking these questions. They don't have the truth. They don't know what they're talking about. They're not divinely inspired. And so for me, that was another red flag. And at that point, I went to my wife, who was a pioneer, and I went to her with these concerns. And I said, I think my faith is slipping away, and here's why. And it was very quickly after, and she was very receptive to it, but essentially told me to just pray about it, and Jehovah will reveal the answer. Very quickly after that, though, it was like the blinders fell off out of my eyes, and I saw, for me personally, I saw that I couldn't believe this anymore, and that my entire belief system was based on maybe well-intentioned lies, is the best way I could put it. I'm not trying to be antagonistic, but that's how I felt at the time. And so I left the church. I just stopped going to the meetings without telling anybody other than my wife. And the elders, came by my house and counseled me. And I, again, repeated my questions. And I said, if you can please just answer this for me. And I'm happy to get into the questions if we need to, but and they essentially just kept repeating, you need to have faith. You need to just believe what we tell you, pray to Jehovah, and everything will be revealed. But these things that I was asking were directly, what's the word that people use? Cognitive dissonance. I had two competing beliefs in my head that I couldn't square. And the stress and anxiety from that was just overwhelming. And once I let go of the Jehovah's Witness beliefs that weren't supported by any evidence, right, I could feel that weight just leave my body, and I felt better. I felt more me, right? So around that time as well, my marriage broke down because I stopped going to meetings. I obviously wasn't a Jehovah's Witness anymore. And we eventually got a divorce, a legal divorce. And I moved. I moved to another state where I didn't really know anybody. I'm skipping a lot of things in my story, but I'm trying to keep this short. So I moved to another state, moved to Oregon, and got into another relationship. And I told my parents, I still had a relationship with my parents at this time because I wasn't disfellowshipped. I had just left. And so I was still talking with them. And I said, hey, I met another woman. Here's her name, really great. And because I felt in a way sorry for my ex-wife, and this is kind of a strange thing, I called my ex-wife after we were divorced and I said, I met someone, we've slept together, you're free to remarry spiritually in the church, because she was still a Jehovah's Witness. So that was doing her a kindness. A few months go by and I get an email from an elder in my old congregation saying, we heard from two witnesses that you're living with another woman in sin. I forget the terminology. And we're going to have a meeting in our congregation, to a judicial committee meeting, to go over your sin, and it's going to be on this date. And I said, okay, well, I'll be there. So I drove back. It was about a 5-hour drive back to my congregation. And I drove with my girlfriend, my new girlfriend, to my congregation. And we go in the back, both of us go in the back room where the judicial meeting was going to be. And the elders tell me, well, who is this woman? We need to have this meeting alone. And I said, well, she's my witness, because if I'm going to be disfellowshipped, I want to witness to what was said. This impacts my relationship with my family, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, well, it's not going to happen unless she leaves. And so she was kind enough to ask me if I wanted to have the meeting. And I said, if you don't mind waiting outside, please do that. And so she waited outside. And the elders asked me, after the judicial meeting started, have you been sleeping with a woman other than your ex-wife? And I said, that's none of your business. And they said, well, that's what their meeting's about. So either you tell us or not, we have two witnesses. And I can remember at that moment, I just felt like I was talking to three men instead of three elders who had no business interrogating me, about this kind of thing. So I asked them a personal question, and I asked them when the last time they masturbated was. And they got red in the face, and they said, well, if I did that with someone other than my wife, I don't recall the answer exactly, but they were like, I'm not going to tell you. And I said, exactly, because it's none of my business. And I got up and I left, and they just fellowshipped me, a few weeks later. But, the point of me telling that story is it was very empowering for me to see them as imperfect men, who were they were well-intentioned. They were trying to follow the direction they got from Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. But it's important, I think, when you're leaving the church, leaving the faith, to have that moment where you learn to say no to these people, and you learn to take back your own agency. And that was my moment of trying to, the start of taking back some of my agency for myself and being who I am, rather than living for somebody else. And so subsequently, I finished my college degree, which was wonderful, probably the best thing I could have done post leaving the church. And started to read voraciously all the things I wasn't allowed to read beforehand, and immersed myself in the world, which I quickly discovered was, yes, there are people out there, as Jehovah's Witnesses tell you, that don't have your best interest in mind, but most people do. And the world's a beautiful place, and if you immerse yourself in it and be present, your life can be enriched so much more by just being willing to be open to it, right? So that's kind of the short version of my story. And I'm happy to get into anything else. I know that was probably only 10 minutes or so.
No, that was great, Michael. And I know that you currently live in Hawaii. So if you can just share, like, what brought you to Hawaii after all of that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll be happy to. So I left the church in 2006 is when that happened. So about 17 years ago, I guess. And I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time. And this, this is a little bit of like the second chapter of my life, right? This is what I consider now my third chapter in Hawaii. But I was a baby, socially, you name it. Any topic, I had to figure out from first principles what I believed. What did I think about, gun control, abortion, tax, name it, gay right. I had to think about it. And so, and I didn't have any friends. I had no social network, nothing. And so because of that, I think didn't take enough time for myself post leaving, and latched, for the lack of a better word, I latched on to a woman who was very supportive and loving, and accepted me for who I was, and is a great human being. And when we got married, right? And so I had instant community again, right? Which was, in retrospect, a mistake. I should have taken more time for myself and figured out who I was before doing that. But her and I lived in Portland, Oregon from 2006 to 2016 when we divorced. And after that time, I finally, for the first time in my life, in 2016, I'm now 39 years old, I finally took some time to figure out what I wanted and who I was, and what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I had been coming to Hawaii ever since 2006, yearly. I got married to her on Kauai. And we both fell in love with the islands and fell in love with Hawaii Island, specifically the big island. And during the pandemic, an opportunity arose for me to work remotely from Hawaii Island. And so I took advantage of that and moved here in 2022. So it's been a good move for me, I guess, would be what I'd say there. Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's also so important to talk about how important it is to find your own identity, to question what it is you believe in, what it is you like, what it is, who you are, and what you want out of life, and no longer be caught up in what we had before as witnesses. So it's creating your own identity by yourself is very, very important, to question everything. The critical thinking that we weren't allowed to do as witnesses is now available to us. And you said you were reading all these things too, which is also so great, because there were so many things that you felt guilty for reading or for learning, because maybe you didn't study the Watchtower for the Sunday meeting, or you didn't study for the meeting, and else, maybe it's psychology or science or whatever, history, whatever it is you're into. And there's so much guilt that comes around that, just because you didn't study for the meetings, or you didn't go out service that week, or whatever it is. Now you have this world of knowledge at your fingertips that you get a chance to learn and do.
And that's absolutely right. And that's the reason I left the Jehovah's Witnesses, was essentially because of my studies in college and some of the reading I had done. So it was a mental leaving, as opposed to many of my friends who left as teenagers for other reasons. They wanted to have sex and do drugs and, whatever it was when you're a teenager. And then they eventually came back. But my leaving was more of a principled leaving based on the research I was doing. And because of that, after I left, I kind of remained in that phase where I was really focused on getting as much knowledge about the world as I could, because that's what saved me in my mind, right? And I think that was good. But if I had to do it again, I would focus. I would spend some more time building community outside of the church, outside of the Jehovah's Witnesses earlier, because I didn't spend any time doing that. And I think now that I'm a little older, I realize how important it is to have other people in your life, to have a community of like-minded people that you can rely on when life doesn't go your way, or you get lonely, or whatever it might be, right? And I think as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, that can sometimes be intimidating and sometimes be challenging, because you might feel like you have the scarlet letter on you, or whatever it might be, or you've never had to interact with people who have vastly different beliefs than you and lifestyles, right? And so it's you have to train yourself into how to be a part of the world and how to be a decent human being and show up for other people and be a friend, and also have the confidence to take the initiative and make friends and be that. A lot of times, I think for me personally, I'm very shy in a group setting, and it's hard to go up to someone and strike up a conversation and make a friend, right? And so if I had to do it over again, yes, the knowledge is important, but also I think community would be what I would say. So
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And a lot of times it takes moving away to build a community because maybe the place you live currently is just reminding you of the old life you have. I didn't start making a community of friends until I moved out of the US. So it's been such a difference. Like I feel like I was trying so hard to make friends while living in the US, and I lived in 3 different states. And it wasn't until I moved out of the US in 2020 that I'm like flourishing with a community of people that I'm connecting with. So, and I also wanted to ask you, what happened to your sister and your brother and your family that are they still witnesses? Or are you still in communication with them, or did they disown you?
Sure. Yeah. So I skipped over that part.
Mm.
So it's interesting. So my father and mother, my dad and mom, I still had a relationship with them up until the point I was officially disfellowshipped. And for about 3 months after that, I would still receive phone calls from my dad, but they would always have a layer of, I'm talking to you to try to get you to come back to the Jehovah's Witnesses, because that's, in his mind, that makes it okay to talk to me, right? And I didn't like that. And I said, Dad, I love you, but if we're gonna have a relationship, you need to accept that I'm not coming back. And so please do not talk to me ever about trying to come back, because it's not going to happen. I'm not asking you to change your beliefs. I accept that. I'm just asking you to accept mine. And he couldn't do that. And so we didn't speak for about 13 years after that. My mother was recently in the hospital, and I received a text message from him out of the blue saying, hey, mom's in the hospital. Can I call you? And he sent me a photo of her in the hospital. And I initially said yes. And then I started thinking about, is it going to be that easy to let him back into my life? What do I really want to do after I had some time to think about this? And I told him, happy to have the call, but I want you to understand that I'm not coming back to the church. I love you. I love mom. I hope she's okay. All of that. But I need you to respect the fact that I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. So if you can do that, I'm happy to have the conversation with you and happy to be a part of your life. I want to be a part of your life. I love you. And he could not accept that fact. And so I haven't spoke with him since then. My older sister she moved out of state. And I don't want to say too much about my relationship with her, in case other people watch that she knows, but we still talk on occasion. My younger sister was actually disfellowshipped years later. We didn't have a relationship. We didn't talk. She was upset with the way that I left, and so we didn't talk for about 15 years. And then I found out kind of through my older sister that she had been disfellowshipped. And I thought, wow, is she, am I going to get my sister back? But it turned out that she had sex outside of marriage and was disfellowshipped for that, and was immediately trying to get back into the Jehovah's Witnesses. So she still is one. So I don't have a relationship with her. Or any of my uncles or cousins who are on that side of the family. None. I do have one cousin who never was baptized. He also happens to be gay, but because he was never baptized, he still has a relationship with his parents. Technicality. And I have an aunt in New York City who was never a Jehovah's Witness. So that's that kind of the extent of my family. But my sisters, yeah, my younger one I don't have a relationship with. My older one I still talk to from time to time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm so sorry about your mother being sick and what happened to what's going on with that situation. I think it's really interesting when parents reach out when something like that happens, and what happens after that is always really interesting.
Yeah, if I could say a little bit more, I mean, I don't,
Sure.
I come off as glib there about, my mom's health, but I think something to understand is I've already grieved the loss of my parents. To me, they're already, I mean, this might sound callous, but they're already dead to me. And so, not that I want them to be, of course I love them, and I want to have that relationship with them, but it's not a relationship if they don't accept you for who you are. And there has to be a boundary somewhere else. I think you lose yourself in how someone else wants you to live, right? I guess would be the message there. It's difficult, but I think necessary to try to heal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think just holding on to the opportunity of maybe mom and dad will love me for who I am until they pass away is not healthy for you, but to grieve them is essential to heal yourself. Um, Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing your story. Is there anything you feel like you missed out that you'd like to add into this interview?
Um, sure. Just one thing. I guess on a closing note, I was thinking of ways, that my life has improved since I left the church. And the first three things that came to my mind. One is I'm not ashamed of who I am anymore. Right. I used to have deep shame about who I was and the things that I liked and my preferences and anything that didn't align with what the Jehovah's Witnesses wanted. So even though I'm imperfect and I make mistakes, I'm not ashamed of that, right? I'm not ashamed of my imperfections, what I like. I've noticed too, I notice the little joys in life now more because I know for me personally, I don't think there's anything after this life. And so I try to be present as much as I can and take pleasure in the little things in life, because I think those little joys that you have and those day-to-day joys add up to a lifetime of experience and happiness. Um, and the people that are in my life now, there's not a lot of them, but the people that are in my life, because I have some healthy boundaries, love me for who I am rather than for it being conditional, right? And so those people do exist. They're out there. Um, and I guess I would just say it gets better.
Thank you again, and definitely gets better as the time goes on. If you're willing to do the work and allow for your authenticity to come forward and set the boundaries that are needed along the way. So thank you so much, Michael, for coming on my YouTube channel and sharing your story. I appreciate it.
Thanks for letting me. Yeah.